Welcome to Novelist Spotlight, the podcast where published fiction writers are interviewed to gather their insights and writing lessons so we can use them to make ourselves better and more effective writers. There are just 3 things I ask of you, if appropriate to you and your experience. Please subscribe, please click on the like button, and please share this program link with any family members, friends, or colleagues who might be interested or benefit from the content. Now, on with our program. And the spotlight, joining us from Zurich, Switzerland, is Madeline Sonik. We're going to open her up. She's going to open herself up because she is a person living an examined life. I know this because she is in Zurich studying Jungian psychology. Carl Jung happens to be my favorite psychologist. I also know this because she's an adventuresome person. She's a Canadian. Though she was born in the United States, she's a Canadian. She's lived in England during the tumultuous Margaret Thatcher years. She is now living abroad studying, as I mentioned, in Switzerland. And her writing is often very personal in nature. I mean, isn't it true that anyone who does serious writing is doing a real form of self-examination? Isn't that a big part of why we write? Now, maybe that's a subliminal element to why many people write, but writing is a form of self-examination and a form of, I would argue, a form of meditation and contemplation and even self-hypnosis. Now, Madeline Sonik, in addition to what I've already told you, she's a multi-genre novelist and anthologist who experiments with techniques and styles in search of fresh forms and original ways to engage readers. Isn't that what we're all doing? I want to learn more about that because we're all trying to engage readers. And oftentimes we're doing it in such isolation, sitting alone in a room and asking ourselves, is a reader really going to jibe with this? Or am I getting into esoteric or boring territory? So some of her titles include Drying the Bones, Fresh Blood, in Fontainebleau. And Madeline Sonik's most recent book is a coming-of-age memoir titled Queasy. This is another reason why I know we're going to open her up, because she, as I said, her writing is highly personal in many cases. Queasy is a memoir that explores her teenage move to England in the 1970s after losing her father and grieving the end of a significant romantic relationship as well. Madeline Sonik, welcome to Novelist Spotlight.
Thank you very much.
I'm jealous that you're in Zurich and I'm not. I've been to Europe many times. I've never been to Zurich. How long have you been there? And how long will you be there? And what precisely are you doing with your time? I mentioned that you're studying Jungian psychology, but that's a very, broad characterization. So tell us about your time in Zurich.
Sure, yeah. I just moved here in February, and my term started at ISAP Zurich, which is a school, an international school where people from all over the world come to become Jungian analysts. That started in March. So I'm not even really grounded here yet, but everything's kind of getting a little bit better and a little easier. And so the way I spend my time, or I was spending my time, was going to school most every day, taking in some theoretical lectures, seeing an analyst, because that's part of what you need to do to become an analyst. You have to see an analyst who works with people who are training. And I'm also working on a symbol paper, which is another requirement of early requirement of my training here. So I have to do a couple of those and a thesis. There's a lot of things to do. And so you asked me how long is the program? Well, the program is actually, you could be in this program for 7 years, but I'm thinking probably I won't be in it that long because I think I can I can move a little quicker through it. I've done a lot of analysis before I came here, and I have quite a good theoretical background because the thesis that I wrote in education was a thesis in which I explored creative writing through a Jungian lens. So I did a lot of readings that are, the important readings that I have to do here. So I'm not really sure how long I'll be here, but it is beautiful. It is a beautiful country. It's very bureaucratic, though. Even just to live here is so difficult, like all the red tape, and it's a catch-22, and it's just to try to get yourself established and get an apartment and all that was very, very difficult. But that's part of the process, Yeah.
So are you studying Jungian psychology to become a therapist or to augment your writing, or both?
All of the above, yeah. To become an analyst, so not a therapist. It would be an analyst. A psychoanalyst is what I would like to become. And yes, I do want it to augment my writing. And yes, I feel this is where pulling together two paths that I've been on since my 20s, which is the creative writing side and then also the depth psychology. And as I get older and I'm moving in, I pass midlife now. I'm on the other side of that mountain. It's like those two streams are coming together. And this is the way they're coming together. They're coming together by me becoming a psychoanalyst, but also writing about that, being a psychoanalyst and about different features of Jungian psychology.
Explain that difference. A therapist would sit down. I mean, a person could say, I'm seeing a therapist, so I'm sitting down and talking to a therapist about my problems, or maybe I'm doing couples counseling.
Yes.
You're saying psychoanalyst or psychoanalysis. So are you still sitting down with a client?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you sit down with a client, but your goals are different. So the way I like to explain it is this. A therapist tries to help you get along in society by basically working toward more of the norms that exist in society, where a depth psychoanalyst is trying to help you strengthen your ego so you can actually be who you are in a society that maybe doesn't accept who you are, which really that would apply to most of us. But most of us, would just conform to what the society tells us, we should do. But then there are other people that really just need to express who they are. And, it's difficult in a society that doesn't accept certain things about people. So self-acceptance.
But why do you say that? Why do you say that? Because sure. I think most people probably, I mean, you're saying most people, it covers most people, but I think a lot of people feel like I'm accepted by society because I'm conventional. I'm I do what I'm supposed to do.
Yeah.
I don't act in any kind of a flamboyant or eccentric way. So why do you feel is it just that part of human nature that just tells us that I don't feel like I fit in here?
Well, I don't know. I mean, my thoughts are that everybody's very individual. We can call ourselves conventional, but everybody has their own, everybody's a snowflake. I mean, not in the sense that they melt in there, but everybody is an individual and has their own gifts and their own way of being in the world. Most of us learn how to suppress that so that we can get along in the world. And many people can live that way and be happy about living that way, right? And they then say, I'm conventional because, whatever it is, whatever parts of them that maybe, didn't work well, they were able to dispose of, and it doesn't cause them a lot of trouble. It's like wisdom teeth, right? You might have a wisdom tooth that gives you hell of trouble and you've got to have it extracted, or you might have wisdom teeth that, maybe occasionally give you a little trouble. You don't have to do anything about it. That's, kind of how I perceive this kind of situation. It's when people really get in trouble with who they are in the world, and they really need help in carrying who they are, because it's, really, it's quite a burden to carry your gift, to carry who you are in the world. It's not easy, right? So that's why some of them
Most people would probably not even believe they're a gift, right? I
Yeah.
mean, how many people have the esteem to say, I'm a gift from God or from nature,
or that they have
and
they have a gift. It's not that they're a gift, but they carry gifts, right? Whatever that gift might be, I don't know what it is. I'm not saying
don't you think most people don't even see that in
Oh
themselves, that
yeah.
they don't necessarily? Yeah. So I mean, so somebody could come to you. I mean, once you're licensed, you hang a shingle, come to you, and it's like, look, I'm not having any particular problem. I'm not depressed. I don't have I'm not going through a breakup in a relationship, but I'm looking to optimize my life. I want to live more richly. I want to have a better understanding of myself. So somebody could be coming to you.
Yeah.
Really with the idea in mind that
Right.
life can be richer if I better understand myself and I have a better sense of expression, perhaps a better way to express and feeling, as you were indicating, more that I can express myself and be and fit in at the same time, feel comfortable with myself.
So I think what I do, I think what any classical Jungian would do is say, let's see what the dreams say. So you start asking about dreams. What are your dreams telling you? Because, the dreams are coming from the unconscious, and they're the things that are kind of directing. And in some instances, you're going to have people that maybe analysis isn't the best thing for them. Maybe it's not the path for them. And that will soon become apparent to both of you. That this isn't really the path for them. And maybe they want to do something else, But I see the thing is you can't, because there are no recipes, and Jung said, I don't really have any theories, even though we've tried to theorize Jung and we say, oh, this, shadow, ego, collective, but he had no theories on how people individuate. It's just that because every individual is different, you have to kind of go with that person, with their kind of unconscious content. And that's why it's depth psychology, because you're not just looking at the external, you're kind of going into the depths of the psyche and, seeing what's there. There's instances where Jung wrote about, people who'd come to him and he knew he couldn't help them, from things that he saw in their unconscious. He just knew it wouldn't be helpful to them. In fact, it might even be harmful to them for them to continue. So, they might be swallowed
So why
up.
Carl Jung, though? Why Carl Jung, who I said is my favorite psychologist, but it could have been Abraham Maslow.
Right.
It could have been B.F. Skinner. It could have been Erich Fromm. It could have been, Freud is I think we've moved past Freud in a lot of ways. built upon what he started. Wasn't that the fallout between Carl Jung and he was a protege of Freud, and then started to realize that, you built this foundation, but actually there's more going on here, that we need to take it past this. And then the conflict ensued, and Carl Jung, having the intellect and the sense of self, that had to have been a big deal for him to break from cross swords with Freud and eventually break from him. But why Jung versus any other psychologist? What was it that appealed to you about Carl Jung?
Because Carl Jung taught so much about, his whole theory is, there's no theory, as he said, but we have to kind of plumb the depths of our unconscious. And that spoke to me, right? And that in the depths of our unconscious, there are unknown things, Freud might say, a lot of, there's so much in Freud that I would say, wow, that's really relevant and interesting. But, I would say that it's not all tied up in a bow, right? Like, we don't really know what's in the unconscious, in our personal unconscious, or like in the collective unconscious, and we need to pull stuff up and examine it. So that to me was one of the features about Jung that really attracted me, that he was so interested in that, and that his ideas about it were very different than Freud's, So I think that it wasn't all just, it's not, this is what's down there, you've got the sexual, all the sex down there. And, because I mean, that maybe culturally the repression of sexuality and the time and age, makes a lot of sense. Right. But not everybody has that, and not, um, it wouldn't necessarily be the case, with every single person. You can't kind of look at every person that way. So then both the individuality and the unconscious examination, I think. And on top of that, I say the balancing. Jung saw how important it was to balance the conscious life with the unconscious, and that this was partly why we had to plumb the depths of our unconscious, because we're the kind of age we live in now is very much, we're very connected to the outer world and consciousness, and don't give a lot of respect to what is really in the unconscious, and can provide a lot of insight and wisdom. Yeah.
I would argue most people don't spend any time on that at all. They don't look within at all. They're just busy doing their thing and don't spend any time with meditation or contemplation or dream analysis, or just spending time alone quietly and seeing what bubbles up. Now, what you just described, overlay that with writing, because you have said, I took a note here, that when we previously talked, you had talked about the writing process from a Jungian standpoint. What does that mean?
Yes. So I'll just refer to my thesis in education to, where I put a lens on creative writing. And I had been a student of creative writing. I'd gotten an MFA in creative writing. So I kind of knew about the workshop model, and I knew about how that functioned. And I wondered, how might it be different, with this lens, a Jungian lens? And one of the things that often is said is, that creative writing can't be taught, right? But what can be taught in creative writing are techniques. Techniques are very much what can be taught. What can't be taught in creative writing is that plumbing of the depths, and the ability to pull up what's down there. That's the thing that teachers don't really know how to teach. They don't know how to do that, right? So that the hope with the thesis was that I would help in some way, help writers learn how to, through using Jungian concepts, be able to access deeper parts of themselves, and allow, in a way, the unconscious to become a collaborator in the writing process. So it's not just a question of the ego writing. And I make that distinction where, a person says, what will I write about today? Maybe I'll write about a bird. I don't know. Well, maybe, something in you deeper doesn't want to write about that bird, So let's see what that deeper part wants. Generally, that deeper part is larger than the ego. It's larger, and it probably has, like I say, wisdom is in there, right? So why not let this collaborate? Yeah.
Kind of the iceberg effect, where what you see above the surface is far smaller than what exists below the surface. Would you concur with that?
I do.
Okay.
I do.
Okay. I should have said earlier, you're a highly educated person. You've got, and I didn't let our listeners in on this, but you've got a PhD in education. You mentioned you have an MFA in creative writing. You have a master's in journalism, and in combined honors bachelor's degree in English and history. You are a sponge, Madeline. You like to learn. There's no question about that. And you're on the hunt right now with Carl Jung and the whole writing process. Have you felt any difference in the process or the act of writing since you've started? I mean, I suspect you've been reading and studying Carl Jung before you ever came to Zurich.
Yes.
Have you felt, has it made an impact on your writing? And if so, how?
Well, right now, one of the things I'm working on is a symbol paper. So, I wouldn't have been doing that otherwise. Like, I wouldn't have been writing so, I'm working with a symbol, I'm developing a symbol, and I don't, I wouldn't normally do that. So in that sense, is taking me into a whole nother avenue of writing. But I think, more than this experience impacting my writing, I think that my writing itself had come to a place where I needed something fresh. I needed a new impetus, so it had already kind of started before I came here. That I have to go another path, in my writing in a way. So anyway, yeah. So that was the idea. Where I'm at now with my writing. I think I'm going to be exploring more things with a depth psychology perspective now. Yeah, I'd say that's something. And maybe, there are certain projects that I've had sitting around for a long time that I really want to get to. One of those is a investigation of a specific fairy tale that I actually had a dream in my 30s in which Carl Jung handed me this book, that he said, this is something for you to work on. So, I in my 30s, I didn't really have time to do that. I was doing other
Wow,
things, but yeah, I saw it's like
that's a
something.
big deal.
It
Now,
wasn't,
did you
yeah,
you
big
knew
deal.
who he was at the time? I
Yes.
mean, you recognized him for who he was, and so here he comes and he's delivering something to you. That sounds
Mhm.
pretty powerful.
It was incredibly powerful. And I started at that time just collecting information for this work, right? But I then got involved in other projects and other things, and I kind of put it on the back burner. And but now it's like something I realize, like, I don't have a lot of time left in this world. I'm an older woman, and I don't know how much time I have actually. So it's like,
None of us do.
yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, that's part of the. It's almost, yeah. I mean, it's part of the kind of the gamble of life.
that's
It's
right.
we don't know when the end is coming,
But
but that's part of what keeps us, or should keep us, on edge. I mean,
Mhm.
when you're younger, you feel indestructible,
Yes.
and as you get older, you start to appreciate that. Let's use our time wisely and understand that it's pretty precious and limited.
Exactly. And I mean, as the older you get, you understand your physicality. It becomes different too. You don't have the energy you used to have, those kind of things, and it just makes sense that, you prioritize, like, these are the things that are important to me to do, so I better get on it.
Do you remember your dreams? I mean, generally speaking, do you remember your dreams, and you dream in color or black and white?
Well, I always, well, since my 20s, when I started working with a Jungian therapist, not an analyst, I worked with a Jungian therapist and started keeping a dream
Journals.
journal. Yeah, a dream
Okay.
journal as well as a regular journal. But so I've kept my dreams since my 20s, and that's something I want to do something with one day too, to just follow the course of major dreams, to watch how things changed, right, over the course of time. I mean, for my own interest, but I think it would be a good document for people to
Well,
have too.
they're your own memories, dreams, reflections. Carl Jung's autobiography. What have your dreams revealed? Um, n- I'm curious. As yeah, you've been tracking him. You've been steeped in Carl Jung since you were young, very
Hmm.
young, and you've been tracking your dreams. The
Hmm.
symbology that was so. The dreams and symbols are so integral to who Carl Jung was and his teachings. What did you extract from your dreams? What can you tell us about that?
So much. I mean, my whole life is, since I discovered the wisdom of dreams, has been directed by dreams. I mean, it in very I just there have been, even, I mean, things that you'd think this just sounds crazy, but I'll give you one example. Okay, so this is just kind of almost like superficial, but this is what a dream did. One year, like after I had finished my PhD, I had applied for postdoctoral fellowship, and I didn't get it that first year. And then the next year it came up and I could apply for it. I thought, oh, I'm probably not going to get it and I won't apply. And that night I went to bed and I had a dream saying, apply for that postdoctoral fellowship, you'll get it.
Wow.
And so I did, and I got it, right? It's like, oh my gosh, but it's like, I don't know. I'm not saying that's going to happen all the time, right? But like, that's just like one very superficial instance of the way I listened to what my unconscious said, But, in a broader way, I can also tell you. So a process that's been
Yeah,
going on.
kind of the
Yeah.
mosaic. There must be a
Yeah.
mosaic that's emerged from this.
Yeah. One of the big events of my life, of course, and you've got this, is when my father died when I was 14. And Queasy has kind of come out of that, right? The book, you'll
Your
see that a
memoir.
lot. Yeah,
Mhm.
you'll see that, right? That when my father died, my whole life changed, and I went through a profound depression and a very bad period in my life uh, after his death. And one of the first dreams that I remember in my young life is that dream in my teens, where my father was a vampire. And I didn't know he was a vampire. I went to see him and he sat up in his coffin. And I said, Dad, you're alive. How can you be alive? Like, what doctor treated you to give you life? And he smiled, and I saw the vampire fangs, and he said, the name of my ex-boyfriend who had we'd just gone through this terrible breakup too, right? So, and I saw that in the shadows, my ex-boyfriend, and he was a vampire too, right? So this is something my symbol paper is on vampires, because the vampire is a symbol in my life, has been big, right? And from
Was
that,
that your way of keeping your dad immortal?
now, isn't that interesting? You should say that. It's like something you can't let go of, something that is kind of biting on you, and you can't let it go, right? So, yeah, it is a way of keeping. Like, people often dream of vampires when they have unfinished business with someone, right? It's not finished; it ended abruptly, but there's still a projection, as it were, right? So you project something, but you weren't able to take the projection back, and then you get this kind of weird experience, right, where you're in this liminal place in your own psyche with this character, or in my case, not just my father, but the whole masculine, the whole animus thing is kind of there. um so how do you
So
work
it's
through it?
both immortality and isn't Dracula is also associated with eternal love, right? The
Yeah.
eternal love for. So I mean that's just sounds so. There you are. You lost your dad. You want him to be alive, and of course you believe, want to believe, or do believe that you will always love him and he will always love you. So it makes sense as a symbol for sure.
Well, this is the
You were
thing.
14.
I
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, it's not that I was sure he would love me. We had an incredibly tempestuous relationship,
Oh,
and I think this is part of why, because it didn't end in a way of a loving grief, right? It didn't end in a way that said, okay, he's dead and everything's good. And no, it ended in a way of things weren't good between us. He died and things weren't good. They weren't resolved. So I think that's part of it. Um, but also, I mean, the myth that I kind of connect this to is the myth of Demeter and Persephone, but particularly Persephone. I mean, you hear a lot about the Demeter myth, but Persephone, who was swallowed up in the underworld by Hades, and Hades was a very vampiric figure, right? He pulled her down there. He gave her pomegranate seeds to eat, which are red like blood, and that meant that she would always have to spend some of her time down in Hades. Uh, but then Demeter kind of talked to Zeus and worked it out so that she could come back for some of the year. And that's, the myth around how come we have nice weather some of the year and then we have crappy weather the rest of the year when Persephone's in the underworld. So I kind of see that myth as my myth, as being kind of pulled down into this underworld. And then how do you get out of the underworld? Well, it wasn't until I was in my 20s the underworld became a place where I couldn't stay anymore. That the depression was just the bouts of depression I would get. And
How did you get out of the depression? Did you just grow out of it?
no,
Did you seek therapy? I mean, how did
yes,
you actually pull
I
yourself
sought
out?
therapy. I sought therapy, and so that was when I started actually examining that dream, and that was in my 20s.
So you lost a significant romantic relationship as well. Your dad dies when you're only 14. The romantic relationship happened when you were at what age?
The same age. The thing is, they're so closely connected because this boyfriend broke up with me 3 days before my father died, and
Oh, wow.
and I
So you were only 14 years old and you were already had a boyfriend.
yeah, and he was
Interesting.
18, which is even
Oh,
more
wow.
interesting. But
Now, were you attracted? I mean, you sound like you may have been probably were very mature for your age. Did you trend towards older boys just because you were looking for a little more maturity?
no, I think maybe he felt a little insecure about himself and thought maybe a younger woman, a younger
Oh.
girl, maybe that's it. I don't, I can't say, I don't know. But for me, because my father was dying at that time, the beauty and he kind of became the center of my universe because he would take me away from the death. He'd come in his car and we'd get in his car and he'd drive us off. And I just go away from death, from my house, for, the smell of death, the smell of cancer, like my father, it was very, very,
So it was a slow death. Okay, that's
yeah.
one of the things I wasn't sure whether he had died suddenly, like in an accident. So you knew your dad was in the dying process. Wow, that's and so this is written about in Queasy, which is your memoir, your latest book,
Actually,
and
yeah, it was really post-death is what I write about in Queasy. Prior to his death, I write about in the other one, Afflictions and Departures. So this is like after my father died. I guess the first essay in this in Queasy is when he's still living, but after that, it's most of it isn't when he's alive. But the fact that he does haunt me, right? And as does my boyfriend from the past.
still
It,
okay,
yeah, not still,
interesting.
not now. I mean,
Oh,
when I was in
I get
England, no, it's over now. It took a long time, let me tell you. But no, those vampires, and so gradually, I mean, let me tell you the rest of it. My vampire dreams, because when I started examining them, the vampiric figures in my dreams started to change, and that they lost teeth, they lost fangs, right? And then gradually, like the hold changed, and also I was able to give up cigarette smoking, which is a weird thing, but it was part of this whole connection to the vampire. I chain smoked. I was just addicted, and I tried so hard to quit, and I couldn't quit. And I smoked like a chimney. And then as soon as I was able to get free of the vampire, I could quit the smoking, and was able to do something real in the world. And there's a lot of things that happened when I was able to come to terms with that character. And I mean, it manifested in many different ways. One example was when I had a dream about my father, and he was in hell. He didn't have fangs then, but he was in hell. And he'd been there for a long time, and I wanted to free him from hell. And then there was another one where I cut him up into little tiny pieces. It was very horrific, this dream, and I put him in a jar. I mean, I actually cut him up into little cubes and put him in a jar. So, I mean, this is all a progression that moves you through. Now, if I had those dreams and I hadn't been examining them, or would I have had those dreams if I hadn't been kind of conscious that part of me is in this underworld, and I don't know. I don't know if I
well.
would
What
have had them.
about what? How did you react the first time you read an Anne Rice novel?
Um, I didn't find Anne Rice's vampire is an evolved form of the vampire. This is another thing I'm kind of looking at, which I think is really interesting, because the vampires seem to evolve as I evolved my own inner vampire. Now we have the vampires and we know they're inner, we feel sorry for them. We have compassion for them. They've become more human, right? They've become far more human. So, I think that's something that you see more and more, and recently it's funny. I just, Netflix, there's this number 3 in Switzerland is, what's it called? First Kill or First Kiss. It's about like this kind of the teenage vampire romance. I just started like watching a little bit of it the other night, but it's just such a far cry, like such a change from, Dracula, which has evolved on and on since Bram Stoker wrote Dracula. And before that, of course, the Romanian vampire, which is I think, is my real connection to the vampire, the Romanian vampire, because the Romanian vampire used to come back to family members and would kill family members. That was something. They didn't just kill go out on a spree and kill anybody. They needed to come back and take the family. So
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So you're a believer in the healing power of symbols.
Yes.
You're writing a paper on symbology. Do you have tattoos on your body?
No.
If you were to have a tattoo, you were going to pick a symbol that's your quintessential symbol and tattoo it. What would it be?
I don't know. I can't say I have a.
So you don't have a symbol that's your power symbol.
No.
You don't have a symbol that you feel especially like the yin yang symbol or a pyramid or what have you.
No, I mean, I like the yin yang symbol and I like the pyramid and I like the snake, but I wouldn't say there's one that and I think I would say that a symbol that I really was into today won't be a symbol that a year from now will mean a lot to me. It's like something that you work through in a way, get another symbol. I mean, it might come back later, but in a different form. That's personal, right? I mean, collectively, it might be different, but if you had a personal symbol, how you might work through it or how you might understand it.
So having lived an examined life, which you have, and you're living an examined life, if you were able to go back in time, what would you tell a 25-year-old Madeline Sonic?
You mean if somebody who pre-Jung or because
knowing what you know now,
okay,
knowing what you know now, what would you tell it at the 25-year-old version of yourself?
Okay, so I know what I say. I know what I tell it. I'd say, you will never believe how fast time moves when you get older. Everyone says it. It's one of those cliches, right? The older you get, the faster time moves. I heard it when I was young. I thought, oh yeah, right. I get it. Yeah. I could never understand it until it happened to me, where it's just like days just go like that, I mean, it's amazing. I can't get over that. Yeah.
I concur. It truly, I mean, I remember my dad talking about how every year goes by faster.
Yeah.
And, but yeah, until you get there, then it's like, wow, this is not just a maxim.
Yes.
This is for real.
Yeah.
Things they really, they speed up.
Yeah. Yeah.
They accelerate.
You couldn't understand it, right? It's just like, the other thing would be like having a baby, right? You cannot understand what that experience is until you have one. Like nobody can tell you. Like they can tell you, oh, it's hard because you have to, get up for feeding. You have to do this. It's not hard. It's like insanity making in some instances. You know what I mean? It's like you've got this other creature that's dependent on you, and it's just something that you just never ever could explain until it happens to you personally. So yeah, I mean, I think there's some things in life like that. So those I might have. That's what I probably would have told the younger me. But I think if I told the younger me that, the younger me would say, yeah, okay, I get it. But I never could have understood it.
Yeah. So a lot of your writing, as I said earlier, is highly personal. You've done a collection of personal essays. You've done a memoir. I suspect your fiction writing, your novels probably have an awful lot of you in them. I mean, that's inevitable, really. But maybe more so with you. You have been, well, let me start with this. Why do you write? How old were you when you started writing, and
Yeah.
why do you continue writing? What does it do?
Well, I think interestingly, and I've researched this, and I think I fall under this category. It was after my father died that I wanted to become a writer, and they find that with a lot of artists and writers, they've had a death of a parent, right? So the next question is, so why is that? Like, why is that the case? And I think for me anyway, I can say that it was because I had such grief that I needed to express. And it was taboo to express that grief, um, to express it in my family. It wasn't, allowed, but also in the culture. You just can't express the grief you feel, especially when it's so overwhelming like that. So the writing allows you to kind of channel the grief. And I mean, I've written about my father probably more than I've written about anybody, or that experience of having lost your father. I say that's my ongoing theme, because it was such a change in my life, and such my beginning, I say, of individuation. My process of individuation was in losing my father, who I had this terribly ambivalent relationship with. Um, so yeah. So I think that
But you're
that's
not
why.
living a life of grief right now, and you
No,
continue. I don't think. Okay, and you continue to write.
that's right.
So, talk about writing post grief.
So the thing is, so once you start doing that and you realize that that's the beginning, that's the way you start, right? It's by doing it, then you realize, okay, so this becomes a way of expressing these things, these deep feelings you have. Generally, that you can express deep feelings through your writing, and then hopefully, if you can express them in a way that people can absorb them or understand them, it can help other people uh, respond and feel those feelings and get in touch with their own feelings. So I think that's part of the process of writing. uh, I think that there are a lot of mostly I would say that the writing is an attempt to give something to people that I maybe didn't have. I didn't have a model in some way, or a perspective, this perspective that helped me through something. Um, with young
So
people.
let's.
Yes, sir. Go ahead. Yeah,
Yeah, I was going to say, let's have you read a little bit from your memoir
sure.
so that people can kind of get a sense of your voice. But while you're getting ready to do that, let me ask you this: the other than Queasy, which is again a memoir, highly personal. It's about obviously about your life, or a period in your life. Which of your books was the most special to you? Which one do you cherish most? Which one um, do you have the most connection with?
Mm.
Or I guess what I'm getting at is, we all write, we all have certain books come out fully formed. I don't mean they come out really that fast. I'm just saying that there is just kind of this, that I wish every one of them could work like this one, or this is the one that really that I reached the peak of my power as a writer with. Which of your books, other than your memoir, would you do you cherish the most? And for whatever reason, you can tell us the reason why you cherish it the most.
I hate to say it. There really aren't any that I cherish.
Mm.
I kind of
Like
feel.
children.
Yeah, well, it's like you write it and then you kind of give it to the world, and then that's it. It's gone, right? It's not yours anymore, and not yours to cherish. Like I don't. I kind of feel that way. Yeah, I don't really have a sense of any that I feel are special or anything. Other than maybe the ones that I'm working on now. You know what I mean? It's kind of like right
Hmm.
now, while they're in the ether, they're so great and exciting, and they're pulling it all down. And one thing I did want to say too is that when you said why did I want to write too, it's like I still need to kind of point out that I don't really feel it was me. It's like this process of the unconscious working with the consciousness. So it's like something I had to pull out, not really me. It's something else. It's the unconscious that bubbles up that you
Right.
pull
Right.
out. But
So
anyway,
what part
yeah.
of Queasy are you going to write? Are you going to write the opening, or are you going to read from the beginning of the book, or from what section are you going to read?
Right.
Set it up for us.
Okay, so I thought I would begin reading Queasy, which is one of the essays in the book, and this essay is based on when me and my mother arrived in England, and my uncle was driving us to his place in Ilfracombe, and the kind of unusual thing I tried to do in this piece is show how me in the back seat, I really couldn't hear what they were saying in the front seat, but I was imagining what they were saying, right? And I was imagining the dialogue and remembering different things. So it's not really so much. It's more about my mother and my uncle, and then my kind of imagining what they're saying. So, do you want me to start reading now?
Yeah, please do.
Okay. My little brother sleeps and drools beside me, exhausted and reeking of vomit. He threw up when the plane landed, then passed out as soon as we got in the car. I know it's a sacrifice for my uncle to drive us. It's over a 6-hour journey from his house in Ilfracombe to Heathrow Airport, and over 6 hours back again. He'd wanted my mother to take a coach or a train. He wanted not to be inconvenienced. But if he's even mildly annoyed, there's nothing in his demeanor that shows it. From the back seat of my uncle's Mini Clubman, a car that seems half the size of those driven in Canada, I can't always hear the front seat conversation, but I know that my uncle and mother are talking. I can see their lips, which are really still. My uncle is saying something about his journey, and my mother, who is buzzing and effervescent, is saying something about herself. She's lost weight, bought a new wardrobe, dyed her hair an auburn red. I look good, I feel good, she tells my uncle, smiling with 2 plates of impeccably straight and whitened dentures, which she seems to be wearing all of the time. It's a new beginning, a new start. She's cast off the shackles of Canada, buried her dead husband, burned, sold, or given away every trace of that awful life. I made a mistake. I see her lips move and know this is what she's saying, because I've heard her say it 100 times. I made a mistake, and I want to come home. My uncle has encouraged my mother's return to England. As a young man, he lived in various cities in North America, and for a short while in Cape Town, South Africa. He's a well-traveled man, having visited all the European capitals, gone to Egypt, Cyprus, and Bombay, and he can tell my mother, in his windy, weighty, public school way, without the slightest quaver of uncertainty in his voice, that England is a place second to none, that as far as beauty and atmosphere and pace of life go, it has no rivals. In short, England is, and always has been, the very best place on earth to live. My mother is certain that my uncle is right. She can no longer abide the hideous bright orange margarine we're subject to buy in Ontario. She can no longer look at obscene plastic bags filled with milk. In England, she's told me, milk containers are still made properly of glass, and margarine doesn't need to be a different color because even the youngest British schoolchild can distinguish the difference in taste. She's railed against the Canadian Postal Service because, unlike England, there's only one delivery each day, and bilingual food packaging is such a bloody, stupid thing it makes her epileptic. At the drop of a hat, she can delineate all of the miseries of life in Ontario, including the fact that it's so bloody cold in the winter and so hellishly hot in the summer that it takes practically everything she has to crawl out of bed in the morning and turn on the TV. I can see my mother's lips move and imagine she is listing all of Canada's shortcomings. She is certain she was a fool to leave her homeland, though at some point she will remind my uncle that she and their mother did so at his bidding. It was after the war, the year tea rationing came to an end. My uncle had a bar in Detroit. He was married to Peggy and in between marriages to Lena. My mother was single. and the war had left England with a serious deficit of men. She regurgitates stories of her young life as if their substance was too rich, and even when the front seat voices disintegrate beneath the engine's thrum again, I hear the stories dizzily repeat.
Wow. So you were born in Detroit. You're a Canadian born in Detroit. You mentioned, I was going to ask you because you don't talk about your mother, and she just came up. Your dad, you mentioned you had a tempestuous relationship with your dad. He dies. There might be a sense of, it sounds like there's a sense of unrequited love between you and your dad. But what about your mom? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, my mother and I, again, we didn't get along very well, especially when I was a teenager. You know, it was very, very fraught. But she did, I was too young for her to leave me behind in Canada. And she also, you know, I did serve a purpose in looking after my little brother, who was just, you know, he was just a baby. So, that was one of the things that I always resented because I felt that I was just kind of wanted because I was a babysitter. But later in
She was an
life,
absentee mother at all? Was she an absentee type mother?
psychologically, yes, but physically, no. I mean, she was always preoccupied with something else, you know. Um, but I do now, you know, it took years, right, to kind of come to terms with my mother's, you know, who she was, her personality. I think we all kind of want parents who are perfect, you know, and we have expectations of them that, you know, well, they should do this, they should do that, you know, but in fact, you know, they're human, right? We're all human, and they do the best they can, but sometimes that's just not the best for us, you know. And sometimes it's not a good match. And I don't know if I was a really good match for either of my parents. I think I was that child that was born into the family just to give them grief, you know, because I didn't really get along with either of them.
Now, you mentioned, or I mentioned at the top, that one of the things that you work on is that you experiment with techniques and styles, searching for fresh forms and original ways to engage readers. Talk a little bit about that. I mean, do you feel that over time you've zeroed in on what actually captivates readers, what really engages them? How has your writing changed over time because of what you've learned through this
Mhm.
experimentation?
Well, I think one thing, it was when I did my master's in creative writing that I really started focusing in on technique. You know, because before that, I really didn't have a lot of technique. So I explore a lot with techniques, right? Like for example, that passage that I just read you from that. So that is an odd technique that I'm using in that kind of essay, in that usually in autobiographical writing, right, you're not going to see someone who's sitting in the back seat listening to two people talking, right? So I thought, what if I did that? Like, what would come of that, right? So I play with different techniques, you know, where is the main character in this? Where are they going to be situated? How are they going to be perceiving this? You know, are we gonna work with something, you know, in the current moment, or is it going to pull in the past? Um, so I play with techniques in that way. Does it engage readers? I mean, I hope so. As you know, I hear from some readers it does. One of the pieces of feedback that I got from my last memoir collection, Afflictions and Departures, especially from women of my age, was, you know, oh, I remembered that, and I'd forgotten completely about, you know, that song or that thing, and it kind of brought the whole age back for them. I'm hoping that Queasy does that to some extent for people who lived in the era that I'm writing about, when Margaret Thatcher was the leader of the opposition and it was still the Labour government in power, and, you know, very, very different England then than it is today.
So, and I'm going to put the URL to your website in the episode notes so that listeners can learn more about you, the titles of all of your books and read excerpts and so on. What are you working on now in terms of a book? I know that you're studying, but in terms of, are you working on a new novel? Are you working on some more personal essays? What's going on with that?
Oh, I have so many projects. I have so many, and I work with them like a wheel. So like I'll work a little bit on this one, and then like when the energy's there, and then the energy shifts, and I have to work on this one. And so right now the energy's on something I'm working on, which is another kind of memoir, and it's about a genetic mutation in my family that gives a propensity to cancer. Again, it goes back to my father. That's why he died of cancer when he was 45, because he had this genetic mutation called Lynch syndrome, and I've inherited this genetic mutation, and my daughter has inherited this genetic mutation, and so many family members have died because they didn't know they had it and they weren't screened, and et cetera, et cetera. So I'm working on this book, which is it's a memoir, but it's incorporating all this information and trying to look at how genetics has, for example, when my father found out he had cancer, there was no way he could be screened genetically, right? It just didn't exist. Like the genetics were in their infancy, but now it's like people can just go and find out all kinds of stuff about themselves through genetics. And so I'm kind of following that historical, a historical kind of chord through this, and then personal stories of family members. And ultimately, one of the main stories, I shouldn't say ultimate, and I don't know whether that's actually going to be the ultimate story, but I had a contact from 23andMe, a second cousin who had just done 23andMe, and I'd done this. That's not how I got my Lynch syndrome diagnosis, but I did it because I wanted to find out more about my family. Anyway, she contacted me and said, could I give her information about the family, because she didn't know anything. Her father left when she was a little girl, and she didn't know anything. And I was able to put her back in touch with her family, the line of family that I'm connected to, which is my father's side. And so many of the relatives in that side died of cancer. And I let her know, I said, I don't want to alarm you or anything, but there's this genetic propensity that I've inherited from my father. Maybe you want to get it checked out, right? And she went and she had it checked out, and she actually had rectal cancer, stage 3. And if she hadn't contacted me, they would not have known that, and she probably would be dead now.
Wow.
So it was a very fortuitous thing that she started looking. So it's like I just think if people are aware that they can actually go and find out if there's some discrepancies in the family, people dying young, go see a genetic counselor, get an understanding so you can actually be empowered and not have to die of the illness.
Let me ask you about final question about the collective unconscious.
Mm-hmm.
Do you believe that a writer can tap into that writers do tap into that at times? We talk about the muse, and we've all had that experience of when the writing seems to really come to us. What about the collective unconscious? Is that something a writer can tap, or is it something that's best left to therapy sessions and dreams and the wisdom of crowds, so to speak?
Mm-hmm. No, I definitely think you can tap into it. I mean, that's,
How is that done?
How is it done? It's by writing and realizing that, I'm just going to allow what comes up, right? And I'm going to try to work with what comes up. And as soon as you start doing that, you're tapping in to unconscious content. And so if you're your personal unconscious content, but also, there's going to be collective unconscious content there too, So really it's just a question of the way you approach writing, right? I think if you, the attitude you take toward writing. So if you take the attitude, is I want to write this. I'm going to do this framework for the writing, and I'm going to. This is what it's going to do. That's not going to necessarily take you to those rich symbols of the collective unconscious. But if you actually honor the fact that you're really not in control of this writing, that there's another there, or a bigger thing there that
Almost get out of the way, like step aside and get out of the way.
That's right. If the ego can, but the ego is important too in trying, midwifing it in a way. That's what the ego's purpose is, not to kind of block it and say, wait, I don't really want this to happen. Probably you've heard more times than you can count people saying, oh, the character just came to life and they had I didn't even know what they were going to do next and they did it, like people who are writing fiction, they're always so amazed that happens, that suddenly the character kind of does its own thing and the ego is no longer involved, right? But that's that's really writing. That's what happens. It's the ego just needs to try to maybe help it express itself in a way that's maybe sometimes there's a little bit of a glitch, or maybe there's a technique you can bring to it, or something like that. But generally it's like it is a collaboration between unconscious and consciousness. You can't just write you can try to write from a conscious place, but then it's kind of dead writing. So I think realize that place, there's another place and it's collaborating, and allow that place to inform what you are writing. It knows
So
it knows
much of
more.
what, I'm sorry to
That's
interrupt, but so much of life comes down to a mindset, doesn't it? That we have this certain kind of mental construct, and some people are very good at basically having a mindset that works in their favor, while other people aren't so good at that, or even just become a mess because they have no real framework or real perspective that they bring to their everyday lives.
And I think too, to realize though, it is perspective, and that you can always take that's something you can do in your life, right? You can say, so how am I perceiving this thing? And can I look at it another way? That's that whole glass half empty, glass half full, right? It's like, so how could I perceive this event in a different light, right? And in perceiving it in a different light, what might it do? So it's kind of just
Exactly.
a shift in perception or attitude.
Our guest has been Madeline Sonik, and I said at the top that we would open her up, and we did it. Listen to what Madeline had to say. Madeline, I didn't know just how detailed you might get or how interior we might get with you, but I suspected that we would be at this place where you would be very open, to the extent that in dreams or nightmares, you had chopped the vampiric image of your father into pieces and put him in a jar. To where I actually do want you to just say, do you think that in that case you were containing him, that you were in a sense getting control? You said you had a tempestuous relationship, but you put him in a place where you had access to him, where he couldn't, you could control him. You had access to him. He couldn't leave you in a sense. But this was a very fleeting thing, of course, because it was a dream. But you might not have known that at the time.
Yeah.
What was your interpretation of that?
Well, I kind of look at it as kind of an alchemical process, right? I did need to examine, because when you slice something apart, right, you're kind of examining it. You're using your nice sharp knife and you're getting in there and then sticking it in this jar for a transmutation to occur. But, that's another interesting way of looking at the dream. The beauty of the dream, there's no one interpretation, right? Like any kind of insight you can bring that resonates, right, is a good one. Like if you've done a good interpretation, the person you're interpreting for will say, yeah, that resonates. That makes sense, right? Like, so it just promotes a certain consciousness. But I like your interpretation. It's good.
Madeline, thank you for coming on the program. This has been really interesting. Appreciate your time.
Okay, well, thank you.